East following a deadly hospital explosion in Gaza. And as Israel prepares for potential ground operations in the west, Hezbollah in the north has fired a wave of rocket fire toward Israel's border. Joining us right now with more on this very volatile situation is senior fellow in foreign policy at Brookings Institution, Michael O'Hanlon. And Mike, thanks for being with us today. There are new headlines that are coming in every hour about this. How would you kind of say you think things stand right now? I think it was pretty disappointing to see that the president was not able to meet with everyone he was hoping to meet with when he was in the Middle East, and now you have additional talk about rockets coming from Hamas.
Hi, Becky. I agree with you. It's
Hezbollah.
disappointing. Yeah. Right. But, and the possibility of a second front is still there. And I'm not really sure just what we would do with our aircraft carriers about that if it developed. We're making this implied threat. We might get involved. The concern I have about that is sometimes implied threats, if your bluff is called, you actually then follow through on something you may not really want to do. But in any event, we'll see what happens on that front. I agree with you. It's disappointing that a broader conversation couldn't happen, because the real question here, I think, is going to be, what is the political endgame in Gaza? And there's not much conversation yet about that. Should it be a UN trusteeship for a certain period of time, after which maybe we even do something unimaginable before, like move straight to a Palestinian state in Gaza and then put off the West Bank idea until later? I don't know what the right idea is, but I know that no American, and even an American president, cannot solve that problem on his own. And therefore, it really does need to involve a broader regional dialogue, most of all, ultimately with the Palestinians, but for now, with the King of Jordan, for example, and others. So it is quite sad that he couldn't address that, but I'm glad he's going to address the nation. I think it's overdue to explain how all these different foreign policy crises fit together, how Biden grand strategy will try to address them simultaneously, and why aid from the United States and a bill in Congress that provides that aid is essential at this juncture.
What is the grand strategy that explains how all of these events kind of tied together? That's a tall order.
It is a tall order. I think on Ukraine, for example, I think the president needs to explain why resolute American support is needed now, why we need to give our Ukrainian friends another year or two to really try to win back as much of their land as possible, because these kinds of things take time historically, because modern military equipment is complex and they haven't even received all of what they need yet. But also to have some kind of a time horizon to acknowledge that if, let's say, when a newly elected president in 2025 takes office, at that point, if the war is still stalemated, we may have to think about a second best strategy, like making sure Ukraine can protect itself, its current territorial holdings, its sovereignty, and be anchored somehow to the West with security, but not necessarily keep building up offensive forces to take back land on the battlefield. But it's too soon for that debate for a lot of reasons. It's too soon to cut off Ukrainians' ability to try to take back the land. I think the president should explain these things take time, and it would be a real travesty if we conceded partial victory to Putin, especially at this early date.
Mike, we've been talking about the turmoil in Washington, D.C., too. You're there. You're in the town. You see what's happening. How much does this cause a problem in terms of what the United States could or should be doing?
Well, the good news, if there is any, Becky, is that in the short term, the United States can provide certain assistance to Israel, and certainly can provide the kind of moral support and political support that we've been providing. And the Israelis typically in these kinds of short wars don't really need our urgent help on the battlefield. They do need some resupply, and we can provide a certain amount of that even with existing authorities and budgets. So I don't really think that our response to the current Israel-Palestinian crisis would be fundamentally different if we had a big pocket of money already in President Biden's hands to disperse to the Israelis as he wished. However, we are going to reach a point in the next few weeks where that changes. And if there isn't additional support at that point for everything from the border crisis to the Middle East, to Ukraine, and to Taiwan, then all of those fronts could become more dangerous. And we could run out of money in a way that really is potentially even tragic for some of those problems. But I like the idea of linking these four problems together, and I hope that will address different constituencies in the United States as well.
Mike, I have a comment and then I got a question. You can respond to either if you like, but everybody's talking about Israel. The number of sort of armchair military analysts about the Middle East right now who have come out of the woodwork is quite remarkable to me. It strikes me that Israel has two immediate imperatives. The first is to stop the rockets that are still raining down from Gaza. as a sovereign nation. The second is to get back the hostages. And what it has to do in fulfillment of those two objectives, I don't know. But it strikes me that those are the things it has to accomplish, and that adding in other things about a Gaza state or this or Palestinian state are complicating the immediate important objectives that if this were the United States and something was happening like this on a bordering country, we would not even be thinking twice about what was going on. I'll leave that there. And then I want to ask you another question, which is about what do we learn from the reaction around the world about the hospital bombing, about how thin or thick is the support for Israel? Is it one bomb away from losing global support?
Well, it's one bomb away from losing Arab support, and it may already have done so. But as to your first point, I think that's well framed, but you need to add a third goal, which is to dramatically weaken Hamas. And we can debate just what that means. And that's, I think, part of the problem here for Israel to figure out just what that means, because we've had Prime Minister Netanyahu say, if you're Hamas, you're a dead man walking. They're going to obliterate and completely eliminate the entirety of Hamas's not just command structure, but even rank and file fighters, weapons caches, underground tunnel networks, et cetera. That's the implication if you're going to completely eliminate the group, which therefore basically indicates it's not really realistic. But I think they want to and will topple Hamas as the government of Gaza, which is why I already bring up the question of what comes next politically.
Right.
Until you have some kind of a concept for that, it's pretty hard to know what the goal should be of any major ground incursion like the one we all expect.
Mike, I just want to go back to what you said at the beginning about bringing in aircraft carriers as a bluff, hoping the bluff doesn't get called. Is that really what you think was happening there? Just a show of support that we didn't really think we would need to use, but every day looks more likely, like it might come into play?
I'm worried about it, Becky. I'm not necessarily against the carriers, but the problem is that when you move them into this kind of a position, you're implying you would use force under certain circumstances. Now, maybe the first one could also be a hostage rescue platform as one possible usage. But when you get the second, and also, by the way, aircraft carriers aren't really required for hostage rescues. So I think this is clearly directed at Hezbollah and at Iran. And that's fine, except that at some point, we may therefore have sort of a slippery slope towards using American military force against Hezbollah in a way that we haven't previously. I'm not sure we'd be any better at it than the Israelis. They're not that good at it. They've struggled with Hezbollah in the past. And so I just worry about a slippery slope towards a decision on the use of force. And I hope people are aware that if there ever is an actual decision, it's a really big deal. And it's not just sort of the natural next step that comes from having made this deployment.
Michael O'Hanlon. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Becky.